My son and his wife have been together for 6 years and have a little 4-year-old girl. They've had their problems every once in a while, but to me it seemed like they always worked through it. You know how couples fight sometimes, but then they're fine the next day. That's how they were. I know he absolutely loves her, and I thought they were very close. Like really close. They seemed solid to me. But 3 days ago, my son came to my door at 10 at night, drunk, sick, and in complete tears. I heard this banging on my door, and I'm thinking, what the hell? When I opened it, there's my son, and he looked like absolute shit. He was drunk, yeah, but also like physically sick, sweating, face all red and puffy from crying. I barely recognized him honestly. Mom, he's trying to talk, but he's sobbing. She's been cheating on me. My heart just dropped. I mean, you never want to hear that about your kid's relationship. I guess she'd been cheating on him. For some time, I still don't know how long exactly. They got into some argument, and she finally admitted it. Just threw it in his face, apparently. 6 years down the drain, just like that. He just fell apart when he tried to tell me what happened. He could hardly breathe right, like having a panic attack or something. His whole body was shaking. I've seen him upset before, but this was different. This was like watching someone's whole world collapse. I didn't ask a bunch of questions that night. I just cleaned him up and put him in bed in his old room. And that's about where he's been since. He looks ill, like genuinely sick. Won't eat anything I bring him. Maybe some crackers here and there, but that's it. I've never seen him so upset, not even when his dad died. His wife and her family were calling us both repeatedly, but we just didn't deal with it at first. Every time the phone rang, he'd jump like he got electrocuted. He was devastated. I wanted him to have a moment to gather himself, like give the man a minute to process that his life just got turned upside down. This morning, I bit the bullet and answered her call. I was hoping maybe she'd be sorry or something, but nope. She was pissed. Not sorry, pissed. Mad that he walked out and left her with their daughter. Mad he wasn't answering his phone. Mad that I was helping him hide. She said she just wanted to talk this out like adults. Like what she did was some little disagreement they could just talk through. I told her that she could talk to him when he chose to contact her, and that I think he'd want to work something out, but she needed to give him some space. It's been 3 days, for crying out loud. She got more upset, and I told her I wouldn't talk if she was going to throw a fit. So she hung up. I don't know what she told her family, but oh my God. I've gotten calls from every single one of them since. Her mom called, begging me not to let him leave her and their daughter. Her sister called to berate me for protecting a deadbeat father. They're all freaking out, but here's what pisses me off. He isn't abandoning his family. His life has been turned on its head, and I want him to have some time to find his feet. It's been 3 days. 3 days. It's not like he's run away forever. But now, everyone is angry at me for letting my son leave his daughter. It's the most unfair thing they could say. He absolutely adores that little girl. She's his whole world. He'd never just up and leave her. Even now, when he can barely function, he's asking about her, worried about how she's doing. He would never abandon her. So am I the asshole for letting him stay with me to get away from his family. I know it leaves his wife in a tight spot, but it's been 3 days and she hardly works part-time. Like maybe 15 hours a week. It's not like he's left her with some impossible situation. She's got family, she's got help, and I absolutely intend to have my son deal with this. I'm not trying to let him hide from his responsibilities forever. But I just can't see him hurting like this and not help. He can barely get through a sentence without breaking down. How is he supposed to have some big important conversation about their future right now? What should I do? I'm not trying to let him hide from his responsibilities, but he's hurting and needs time to breathe. Is 3 days really too much to ask? I mean, we've talked about the possibility that his daughter might not be his biologically. You have to Think about that now, right? But he doesn't plan to abandon her regardless. He loves his little girl and would, despite anything. That's just who he is. And as far as if her family knows the full story about the cheating, I have no clue. I haven't even tried talking with them yet, beyond those phone calls where they're yelling at me. Maybe they don't know what she did. Maybe they think this is all coming out of nowhere. But right now, I'm just focused on helping my son get through. This, like I said, it's only been 3 days. 3 days since his whole world fell apart. I feel like that's not too much time to ask for before he has to deal with lawyers and custody and all that mess. But everyone's acting like I'm helping him abandon his kid when that's the last thing that would ever happen. I just don't know what to do anymore. Everyone's mad at me, but I can't just throw my son to the wolves when he's like this. He's my kid too, you know?
7 years ago, when I was 25, I lost my one and only soulmate, my best friend Emma. She was my world and my rock, and everything made sense around her. We've been friends since we were kids, grew up 3 houses apart, went through elementary school, middle school, high school, and college together. She was the kind of person who could make you laugh until your stomach hurt, who would drive across town at 2 a.m. if you needed her, who remembered every important date and celebrated every small victory with you like it was her. Oh, and I could talk about her all day, but that would take too long to write down. And I would probably break down in tears anyway. She had this way of seeing the best in everyone. This infectious optimism that made you want to be a better person. When I was having a panic attack about a job interview, she'd sit with me and practice questions until I felt confident. When I got my heart broken by some loser in college, she showed up with ice cream and terrible movies and didn't leave until I was laughing again. After she passed away due to a horrible freak accident, a drunk driver hit her car while she was coming home from visiting her parents. I fell into a depression. That led to me drinking away my feelings. I couldn't process that she was gone. I kept expecting her to call me or show up at my door with some crazy story about her day. The world felt wrong without her in it, like someone had turned off all the colors and sounds. At first I was just having a glass of wine with dinner to help me sleep. Then it became a bottle. Then it was whatever I could get my hands on during the day just to make the pain stop. I couldn't function at work, couldn't concentrate, couldn't even get out of bed some days. This completely altered my life for the worse. I lost my apartment. When I couldn't pay rent anymore, I lost my friends who got tired of my drunken phone calls and me canceling plans. I lost my family's respect. And I basically lost my entire life as I knew it. I had absolutely no one, and my parents were so ashamed of me that they refused to let me live with them. My dad would barely look at me when I showed up at their door, and my mom would just cry and say they didn't know how to help me anymore. They'd tried interventions, they'd offered to pay for rehab, they'd done everything they could think of. But I wasn't ready to get clean yet. They said having me in their house was too painful because they couldn't watch me destroy myself. And my sister Rachel? She claimed she was living in an apartment that was way too small, and that she couldn't house me. She was always my parents' favorite anyway, the responsible one, the one who made good choices, the one who had her life together. She had this nice little one-bedroom place that my parents had helped her get after college. And she said there was no way I could stay there even temporarily. She acted like I was asking her to solve all my problems, instead of just asking for a couch to sleep on while I figured things out. I ended up being homeless and desperate for a long time. I slept in my car when I could afford gas, stayed in shelters when they had space, couch surfed with acquaintances who barely knew me but took pity on me. I hit rock bottom so many times I lost count. I was arrested twice for public intoxication, spent a night in jail, got banned from several bars for causing scenes. It was the darkest period of my life, and honestly there were times I didn't think I'd survive it. 6 years, and what felt like a million AA meetings later, I am now fully sober with a kid on the way. Getting clean was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the best. It took me 3 tries before it stuck, and I had to completely rebuild my life from scratch. I got a sponsor, worked the steps, found a job at a nonprofit helping other people in recovery, and slowly started to believe I deserved good things again. I never kept contact with my family after what happened. I was too hurt and angry. And honestly, I needed to focus on myself without the baggage of their disappointment and judgment. Instead, I focused on my recovery and eventually met David, the love of my life. He's also in recovery. We met at a meeting actually, and he understands my journey in a way that most people couldn't. He's patient and kind and supportive, and he helped me believe I could have a happy, healthy relationship again. We've been together for 3 years now, married for 1. And we just found out we're expecting our first baby. I'm 12 weeks pregnant. And we're both over the moon about it. We have a small but beautiful life together. A little house we rent. Good jobs. Amazing friends from the recovery community. And now a baby on the way. It's everything I never thought I could have again. Fast forward to a month ago. My sister somehow found my new number through an old mutual friend and contacted me asking if she could stay at my house for a while. She said she lost her job at some marketing firm, had been through a tough divorce, and had also lost her house. Apparently she'd sold the house my parents bought her to move in with her partner, and then lost that house in the divorce settlement when things went south. Obviously I refused, reminding her of how she treated me when I needed help the most. I told her I remembered very clearly being told her apartment was too small for me to even sleep on the floor, and now suddenly she expected me to open my home to her? I said I built a new life for myself and I wasn't interested in reconnecting with people who had turned their backs on me when I was at my lowest point. She kept calling and texting, getting more and more desperate. She said she was staying in a motel and running out of money, that she had nowhere else to go, that she'd learned her lesson about family loyalty. But I held firm. I'd worked too hard to get where I was to let toxic people back into my life, even if they were blood relatives. Last week, my parents and my sister somehow found my address. I think they hired a private investigator or something, because I've been very careful about keeping my information private. They showed up at my house unannounced, demanding that I let my sister stay here. My dad was yelling about how family should help family, and my mom was crying and saying they didn't raise me to be so heartless. My sister defended her past actions by revealing that she found out she was pregnant right after Emma passed away, but never wanted to tell me due to the fact that I was grieving and drinking. She said she didn't want me to stay at her place because she was scared that I would somehow influence her into also becoming an alcoholic and harm her unborn child. She claimed she was protecting her baby, and that I should understand that now that I'm pregnant myself. She said that her situation is different now because she already has kids, 2 of them, ages 5 and 7, that her ex-husband has custody of due to her financial instability. She wants to get her life together and get her kids back, and she says she needs my help to do it. She kept saying things like, you know what it's like to lose everything, and you should understand how hard it is to start over. After a long discussion, things were getting really heated. My husband was trying to mediate, but my dad started getting in his face, calling him names and saying he was probably an addict too. My sister was crying and begging. My mom was guilt-tripping me about Emma and how she would have wanted me to help family. And I just lost it. I told them all to get off my property and called the police when they refused to leave. The cops came and made them leave, but they didn't arrest anyone since it was technically just a family dispute. However, they did file a report and told me I could use it if I wanted to pursue a restraining order. I am now seriously thinking of filing a restraining order against all 3 of them. I don't want them knowing where I live. I don't want them showing up at my work. And I definitely don't want the stress while I'm pregnant. But my husband David is telling me to let my rage go and help my family. He says holding grudges isn't good for my recovery, and that maybe this is a chance for healing and reconciliation. He thinks I should at least consider letting my sister stay for a short period with strict boundaries like no drinking, no drugs. She has to contribute financially, she has to respect our house rules, and she has to be actively looking for work in her own place. He says everyone deserves a second chance, and that my recovery has taught me about forgiveness. But I honestly don't know what to do. Part of me feels like David doesn't fully understand how much my family hurt me, because his family was supportive during his addiction. His parents paid for rehab, let him live with them during early recovery, and celebrated every milestone with him. He doesn't know what it's like to be completely abandoned by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. I already feel super stressed while pregnant and have hormones jumping all over the place, so that may also be contributing to how angry I am about this whole situation. My doctor has told me that stress isn't good for the baby, and I'm worried that having my sister here would just create more drama and chaos. At the same time, I keep thinking about those kids she mentioned, my niece and nephew that I've never even met. They're innocent in all this, and if their mom is struggling this badly, what kind of life are they having with their dad? Part of me wonders if helping my sister get back on her feet might ultimately help those kids too. But then I remember sleeping in my car while she was living comfortably in her apartment, claiming there wasn't room for me. I remember my parents' disappointed faces and the shame I felt every time I had to ask for help and got turned away. I remember feeling like I didn't have a single person in the world who cared if I lived or died. I need someone's opinion on this situation who doesn't know me personally and can be objective about it. Am I being too harsh by refusing to help? Should I give my family another chance? Or should I protect the peace and stability I've worked so hard to build? Is a restraining order too extreme? Or is it necessary to protect my new family? I'm hoping for some honest advice because I'm really torn and I need to make a decision soon. My husband means well, but I think he's being too optimistic about how this could turn out. What would you do in my situation?
I am married and have 3 kids, all are teens. My husband and I both work and my kids are in school and do sports or clubs after school. Pretty typical family setup, I guess. My husband works in construction. I work in marketing. The kids are always busy with something. My oldest plays volleyball and is in student government. My middle kid does track and drama club, and my youngest is in band and plays soccer. Our house is basically a revolving door of backpacks, sports equipment, and teenagers. Grabbing snacks, I recently hit a ceiling in my field, and in order to continue to grow professionally, I had to get a graduate degree, so I started my master's degree. It wasn't really optional if I wanted to keep advancing. My company basically said, look, you're good at what you do, but without the degree, you're not going any higher. So I bit the bullet and enrolled in a program that lets me do most of the work online with some weekend classes. In the past, I usually did most of the chores around the house, and I mean most of them. My husband does the typical man chores. Mowing the lawn, taking out trash, fixing things that break, shoveling snow, that kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong, he does his part, but it's like once a week stuff mostly. My kids have some of their own chores, like doing their own laundry, taking turns sweeping and vacuuming the main areas, cleaning their own bathroom that they share, loading and unloading the dishwasher on rotation. Basic stuff, but I did a majority of the rest and all of the cooking. I'm talking about grocery shopping, meal planning, cleaning the kitchen after dinner, doing the deep cleaning, organizing closets, keeping track of everyone's schedules, making sure bills get paid, laundry for towels and sheets, cleaning our master bathroom, dusting, mopping, the works. I honestly didn't mind it too much before because I had the time and energy for it. I am a year into my degree now. At the start, I was keeping up with the chores I did before, but it quickly wasn't possible. Between my full-time job, classes too, nights a week, homework, projects, and everything else, something had to give. I was staying up until like 1 a.m. trying to get everything done, and I was exhausted all the time. I asked for help and was told everything is fine. You're being too picky. Like when I mentioned that the baseboards were dusty or that we were out of toilet paper upstairs again, my husband would just shrug and say the house looked fine to him. The kids would just kind of ignore me when I brought stuff up. It felt like I was talking to a wall. But over time, my family seems to be getting fed up with the state of things. They've been complaining about things a lot lately. Everything from eating frozen meals, which I make myself in large batches on Sunday and freeze them for later. They're not store-bought crap to the floors having stains. Like if you cleaned up spills when they happened, they wouldn't be stains. The stairs have dust and pet fur on them from our 2 cats. There are water spots on the bathroom mirror. The baseboards look dingy, stuff like that. If they bring any of this up, I tell them they are capable of handling it themselves. But they just walk away, and it doesn't get done. My husband will be like, yeah, the kitchen floor is kind of sticky. And I'll say, well, the mop is in the closet, and he'll just walk away. The kids do the same thing. They'll complain about something, and then act like it's not their problem to fix. I'm doing what I can. But between work, school, and everything else at home, it can't all be done by just me anymore. We aren't living in squalor or anything. The house isn't gross. I just can't get to the finer details like I could before. Like, yeah, there's pet hair in the corners and the windows have spots on them. But we're not living in filth. Yesterday, my husband came to me while I was doing my homework at the kitchen table and said the shower curtain liner in our bathroom was moldy and needed to be replaced. Not, hey, I noticed this, I'll grab a new one tomorrow, or where do we keep the extra liners? Just this is moldy like it was my problem to solve. This pushed me over the edge. I had been building up to this for weeks, honestly. Every little comment about how things weren't as clean as they used to be. Every time someone pointed out a problem but didn't do anything about it. Every time I asked for help and got brushed off. I was just done. I closed my laptop and told everyone to come into the living room. All 3 kids were home, and my husband was there, so I figured this was as good a time as any to address this. I told them that if they don't like how something is, they have able bodies and can deal with it themselves. That they have the skills to clean. I have just been taking care of so much that they didn't see how much work it actually was. Now I need them to step up. That if they don't like something, they need to step up and take care of it instead of just pointing it out to me like I'm the house manager, and how I also plan to redistribute chores. So it's not all on me anymore. My kids immediately started arguing that they shouldn't have to do more. They're in school and busy afterwards with sports and clubs. My oldest was like, I have practice every day after school and games on weekends. When am I supposed to deep clean the house? My middle kid chimed in with, I already do my own laundry and help with dishes. That should be enough. I told them that I don't care. I am busy too. I have a full-time job. I'm in graduate school, and I can't do it all anymore. That they need to step up or shut up, in nicer terms, obviously. I didn't literally say shut up, but I made it clear that complaining without helping wasn't going to fly anymore. That night, my husband told me I was too harsh and need to lighten up. He says I was rude and basically telling them their feelings don't matter and I need to lay off of them. That the kids are stressed with school and don't need more pressure at home. He was acting like I had just screamed at everyone, when really, I was just firm about what needed to change. I told him the message wasn't only for the kids, it was for him too. He needs to step up and help more around the house instead of just doing his weekly outdoor chores and calling it even. Like, yeah, mowing the lawn is important, but it's not equivalent to everything I do inside the house every single day. But afterwards, I started to doubt myself and felt like maybe I was too harsh. No one is really talking to me right now. The kids are being polite but distant. My husband is being kind of cold. I'm worrying now that I was too harsh and should have approached it differently. I mean, I did change up the status quo in the house for my own personal reasons. I chose to go back to school, so in a way, I chose to create this situation where I couldn't keep up with everything like before. Maybe I should have talked to them about it more gradually instead of just laying down the law all at once. But at the same time, I feel like I shouldn't have to beg my own family to help maintain the house we all live in. Like, why is it automatically my job to replace a moldy shower curtain liner? Why can't my husband just do it when he notices it? Why do my kids think that doing their own laundry exempts them from helping with anything else? I've been thinking about this for days now, and I honestly don't know if I handled it right. Part of me thinks I should apologize and maybe ask for help in a nicer way. But another part of me thinks that I shouldn't have to ask nicely for my family to help take care of our home. I guess I'm just wondering if I really was too harsh, or if they're just not used to me standing up for myself at the cues. Honestly, I've been doing this for years without complaining, and now that I need help, suddenly I'm the bad guy for asking for it. My neighbor set up one of those little free pantries/farm stands things where people can take items that they grew in their garden. Pantry stuff they don't need, donated stuff from other people, that kind of thing. You've probably seen them around. They look like little wooden houses on posts with doors that open up. In theory, it's a genuinely great idea, and especially in a time when life in America sucks ass and people are struggling to make ends meet. My family is definitely included in that struggle. We're not destitute or anything, but money is tight. Grocery bills keep going up, and every dollar counts. I actually thought it was pretty cool when my neighbor Dave first put it up about 3 months ago. He's a decent guy, retired teacher, grows way more vegetables than he and his wife can eat. The idea was that he'd stock it with his extra produce. Other neighbors could contribute stuff they didn't need, and people in the community could take what they needed. Very wholesome community building type stuff. The problem started almost immediately. People started coming into my yard to pick things in my garden. It's not just taking a stray tomato that fell on the ground or something reasonable like that. I'm talking about people walking right up to my plants, examining them like they're shopping at a grocery store, and harvesting whatever they want. I should probably mention that my garden is pretty substantial. I've been working on it for like 5 years now, expanding it bit by bit. I grow tomatoes, peppers, beans, zucchini, squash, cucumbers, herbs, basically everything my family eats regularly. It's not just a hobby for me, it's how we keep our grocery bill manageable. I spend hours every week weeding, watering, dealing with pests, harvesting. It's a lot of work, but it saves us probably a couple $100 a month on produce. My garden is in my front yard because that's where I get the best sun. The backyard is too shaded with all the oak trees. So it's visible from the street, but it's clearly on my property. Clearly well-maintained and intentional, not some wild patch that anyone could mistake for community gardening space. At first, I tried to be understanding. Maybe people were confused about where the free stuff was versus where my personal garden was. So I put up signs saying, "Private garden, please do not pick in free produce at neighbor stand only." Clear, polite signs that I thought would solve the problem, but people just ignored them. I installed rabbit fence around the whole garden, those wire fence panels that are about 3 feet high. I figured that would be a clear enough barrier to indicate this was private property. I even angled a tarp along one side so you can't see the plants as clearly from the road, thinking maybe people were just being opportunistic because they could see the ripe tomatoes, but people just hold their kids over the fence to pick tomatoes and beans, or they straight up jump over it themselves. I've watched people from my kitchen window literally lifting their children over my fence and directing them to pick specific vegetables. Like, what are you teaching your kid about respecting other people's property? The first major confrontation happened about a month ago. I was working in my garage and I heard voices in my front yard. I looked out, and there's this woman, probably in her 30s, with a kid who looks maybe 7 or 8 years old. The kid is inside my fence area picking my cherry tomatoes and putting them in a plastic bag while the mom is standing there directing him. "Get the red ones. Those aren't ripe yet. Grab some of those beans too." I walked outside and yelled, "Hey, stop. Those are not for you to take." The woman looked up at me with this guilty expression, but then told her kid to move faster instead of, apologizing and leaving. Then she tried to run away with her kid. I was so pissed off, I actually jogged after them. When I caught up to her in the driveway, I asked her what the fuck her problem was. Yeah, I swore. Because I was angry about someone stealing from me in broad daylight while I watched. She immediately turned it around on me. How dare I swear in front of her child? Why am I so angry? Am I really that upset about a couple tomatoes? Like she was the victim here because I used a bad word after catching her red-handed stealing from my garden. She acted like I was being completely unreasonable. I said, "Yes, I am upset that you are stealing from me. Those tomatoes don't just magically appear. I've planted them. I've been taking care of them for months. They're food for my family." She just rolled her eyes and walked away with her bag of my tomatoes. The next day, I decided to approach my neighbor Dave about the situation. I figured he probably didn't realize his little free pantry was causing problems for the rest of us. I walked over and explained what had been happening. People confusing my garden with the free stuff. Ignoring my signs, jumping my fence. I asked if maybe we could work together to move the pantry to the other side of his driveway so it would be next to our other neighbor's house instead of next to mine. The other neighbors, this older couple, don't have a garden out front, just lawn and some decorative bushes. I thought maybe if the free pantry wasn't right next to my very obvious vegetable garden, People might be less confused about what was free versus what was private property. Dave said he didn't want to move it, at least not until the end of the growing season. He'd put effort into building a concrete pad for it and running electricity out there for a little light. I understood that moving it would be some work, so I asked if maybe he could make larger signs for his pantry or talk to people who were using it, or just do something to help make it clear that my garden was separate and not part of the community sharing thing. That's when he got weird about it. He was like, "Can you really not afford to share?" With this tone, like I was being selfish. I tried to explain that it's not about affording to share. I do share when I have extra. I've actually put surplus zucchini in his pantry before. But these people aren't taking my vegetables because they're starving and can't afford food. They're taking my tomatoes because they want them and they're free and convenient. He said that. I'm going to have to learn to live with it for now, and we can talk about finding a solution together that will benefit the whole community after the growing season is over. Like this was just something I needed to accept as the cost of him having his little community project. I said, "I do not care about finding a solution that benefits the whole community. I care about finding a solution that stops people from stealing from me. Because that's what it is, theft. Just because someone put up a free pantry near my house doesn't mean everything in my yard is suddenly community property." Dave got all defensive, said I was being dramatic and anti-community. He suggested that maybe I should just plant extra if I'm so worried about it. Yeah, because I have unlimited space and time and money to plant extra food just so random people can steal it without me being upset about it. I left that conversation feeling really frustrated because it was clear he didn't see this as his problem to solve. In his mind, his pantry was this great community resource, and I was just being a selfish neighbor who doesn't want to share. But this isn't about sharing. If someone knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I'm really struggling right now. Could I have some vegetables from your garden?" I'd probably say yes, depending on what I had extra. I've given away plenty of surplus produce over the years. This is about people feeling entitled to just take whatever they want without asking. So the stealing continued. People figured out pretty quickly that the signs and low fence weren't actually going to stop them if they really wanted those vegetables. I started spending more time watching out the window, which made me feel crazy and paranoid. My wife started asking why I was always angry about the garden stuff. Last night it happened again, and I finally just lost it completely. I was washing dishes after dinner, and I looked out the kitchen window, and there's this guy, probably in his 50s, just casually helping himself to my bean plants. Not even trying to be sneaky about it. He had brought his own container and everything. Like he was grocery shopping. I went outside and told him to stop and get out of my garden. He looked at me like I was crazy and said something about the free vegetables. I said, "No, those are free vegetables," pointing to Dave's pantry. "These are my vegetables in my garden." He started arguing with me about it, saying it was all the same thing, and why was I being so possessive about plants? That's when I completely snapped. I went and got my garden hose and sprayed his ass with it. Just soaked him completely. He started yelling at me, calling me psycho, and saying he was going to call the police. After a minute or so of him yelling, Dave came out of his house and started yelling at me too. He said I was completely out of line and that I can't just assault people with a hose for taking some vegetables. I told both of them that I'd asked nicely. I'd put up signs. I'd tried to work with Dave on a reasonable solution, and nothing had worked. So now I was going to defend my property the only way that seemed to get people's attention. Dave said I was going to scare people away from using the community pantry and that I was being hostile and unwelcoming. The guy I sprayed left muttering about crazy neighbors and saying he was never coming back to this street. Well, apparently he wasn't the only one who felt that way. This morning, I checked our neighborhood Facebook page, and there are posts warning people to be careful if they come by. Dave's pantry because there's an aggressive neighbor who will attack people. Someone else posted asking if anyone knows what my problem is and why I hate community sharing so much. Dave has also been posting about how I'm scaring people away from a community resource that's meant to help families in need. He's painting me as this selfish, hostile person who doesn't want to help others and gets violent over a few vegetables. I told him that I'm going to continue defending my garden until he does something about the fucking thieves who feel entitled to my property. I said if he wants to run a community garden where everyone can take whatever they want, he needs to do it in his own yard or find a different location that doesn't involve people trespassing on my land, he said. I'm being unreasonable and that I need to think about the bigger picture. People are struggling and this pantry helps them. I said the bigger picture is that I'm also struggling and I grew this food to help my family, not to subsidize random strangers who are too entitled to ask permission before taking things. I feel like I'm losing my fucking mind here. Everyone is acting like I'm the villain in this situation when all I want is for people to stop stealing from me. It's not like I'm hoarding wealth or refusing to help people in need. I'm asking people not to take food that I grew for my own family without permission. Am I the asshole for asking Dave to move his pantry so it's not right next to my garden? Am I the asshole for being pissed OF that people are fucking stealing from me? This is food for my family. I put time and effort and money into growing it. Why is that so hard for people to understand? I'm starting to think I need to put up a real fence, like 6 feet tall, so people physically can't get to my plants. But that's going to cost money I don't really have, and it seems crazy that I should have to fortress my own yard just to keep people from stealing my vegetables. What would you do in this situation? Am I really being unreasonable here? Or are people just so used to taking whatever they want that they can't understand basic property rights anymore?
Earlier this week, I was on a flight from LA to San Francisco for work, and I'm still thinking about what happened because it's been bothering me for days. I'm 40 years old and I travel for business probably twice a month, sometimes more depending on what projects I'm working on. You'd think after all these years of flying I'd be more confident about it by now, but honestly it hasn't gotten much easier. Every single flight is still an ordeal for me, and I have to use very specific strategies just to get through them without having a panic attack. I always book my flights way in advance, usually 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time, so I can get exactly the seat I need. It has to be a window seat, preferably over the wing where there's less turbulence, and I always pay extra for it if I have to. I know it probably sounds neurotic to people who don't have anxiety issues, but I have very specific coping mechanisms that I've developed over the years working with my therapist, and they only work if everything goes according to plan. This particular flight was booked about 6 weeks ahead of time through my company's travel agent. I had specifically requested seat 1 to A in premium economy, which is usually perfect for me. Window seat, good location on the plane right over the wing, enough legroom that I don't feel claustrophobic. Premium economy costs more than regular coach but less than first class, and my company is usually okay with the extra expense because they know I have documented anxiety issues around flying. I always arrive at the airport super early, usually 2 hours before domestic flights and 3 hours before international ones, because rushing or feeling like I might miss my flight makes my anxiety exponentially worse. For this flight I got to LAX at 9 a.m. for an 11:30 departure, which gave me plenty of time to check in, get through security, find my gate, and do all my pre-flight anxiety management stuff. I had checked in online exactly 24 hours before departure, like I always do, specifically to make sure nothing weird happened with my seat assignment. I've had flights where the airline moved me to a middle seat or an all seat at the last minute, and those experiences were absolute disasters for my mental health. So I'm pretty obsessive about confirming my seat assignment multiple times leading up to travel. The flight from LA to San Francisco is only about an hour and a half, which is one of the reasons I like this particular work trip. It's short enough that even if my anxiety gets bad, I know it'll be over relatively quickly. But it's also long enough that I still need my full anxiety management protocol. I can't just white-knuckle it for 20 minutes like I might on a really short regional flight. After I boarded the plane and was comfortably settled into my window seat with all my anxiety supplies laid out, my prescribed Xanax that I take about an hour before takeoff, ginger candies for nausea, my noise-canceling headphones, My carefully curated playlist of calming music, a book I've read probably 15 times because familiar stories help keep my mind occupied, and my little stress ball that I squeeze during takeoff and landing. I got a notification on my phone that my seat had been upgraded to first class. The notification came through the airline's app and showed seat for F, which was also listed as a window seat according to the seat map. At first I was genuinely excited because who doesn't want a free upgrade to first class, right? Free drinks, better food, more legroom, the whole first class experience. My initial thought was that maybe I'd gotten lucky with a last-minute upgrade, because the flight wasn't full or because I have some loyalty status with the airline. But then I started second-guessing myself and overthinking the situation, which is pretty typical for me when I'm already anxious. I've been on enough business flights to know that airlines sometimes move people around for operational reasons that passengers don't always understand. Maybe they had overbooked premium economy and needed my seat for a family that had to sit together. Maybe there was some kind of weight distribution issue, and they needed to move passengers around to balance the plane. Maybe someone had a medical emergency and needed a specific type of seat. I started worrying that someone else actually needed my original seat for some important reason, and that by staying put I would be causing problems for other passengers or the flight crew. The last thing I wanted was to be the selfish passenger who caused delays or complications, because I insisted on staying in a seat that was needed elsewhere. I've seen other passengers get into arguments with flight attendants about seating, and it always looks so stressful and embarrassing. So I decided to gather my stuff and move to first class like the notification had instructed. I packed up all my anxiety supplies, carefully putting my Xanax back in its prescription bottle, wrapping up my headphone cord, making sure I had all my ginger candies. I was trying to work quickly because I assumed it was some kind of overbooked flight situation and someone had probably already been assigned to my original seat. As I made my way toward the front of the plane, weaving through other passengers who were still getting settled, and putting bags in overhead compartments, I noticed another passenger doing the same thing. He was an older gentleman, probably in his mid-60s, with that polished, professional appearance that suggests he travels frequently for business. He was wearing an expensive-looking suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked well-used, and moving with the kind of confident efficiency that comes from years of frequent flying. He had the demeanor of someone who probably flies first class regularly and knows exactly how airline operations work, the kind of passenger who understands all the unwritten rules about upgrades and seat assignments, and doesn't get flustered by changes in plans. I envied that confidence because I always feel like I'm barely hanging on when it comes to flying. Even after all these years of business travel, when we both reached the first class section, which was only about 6 rows with maybe 24 seats total, the flight attendant was standing near the front trying to manage the boarding process. She was a woman who looked to be in her mid-30s with the kind of polished, professional appearance that veteran flight attendants develop, perfect makeup, even at the end of what was probably a long day, hairstyled in a neat bun uniform, crisp and well-fitted. She seemed rushed and a little frazzled, which I completely understood because boarding was clearly running behind schedule. There were still passengers coming down the jetway. People were taking longer than usual to get their bags stowed, and I could see ground crew outside the window doing their pre-flight checks. The captain had already made an announcement about departing a few minutes late due to air traffic control delays, so everyone was probably feeling pressure to get things moving quickly. When she saw us approaching with her phone showing upgrade notifications, she quickly told us to just take any open seat in first class. She gestured vaguely toward the cabin and said something about needing to get the door closed as soon as possible. Her tone was professional but definitely hurried. She clearly wanted to get us seated quickly, so they could finish boarding and start the departure process. The older gentleman immediately walked over to C4F, the window seat that was technically assigned to me according to my upgrade notification, and started putting his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. He moved with the kind of confidence that suggested he was used to getting premium seats, and didn't really think twice about seat assignments. He probably assumed that sit anywhere meant exactly that, and that specific seat assignments didn't matter as long as we were both in first class. I stood there for a moment feeling awkward and uncertain, which is pretty much my default state when I'm anxious and dealing with unexpected situations. On one hand, I didn't want to be difficult or cause any kind of scene that would hold up the flight or annoy other passengers. I've seen people get into arguments about seats before and it's always uncomfortable for everyone around them. On the other hand, I really needed that window seat for my anxiety management. It wasn't just a preference or a nice to have. It's a crucial part of how I manage to get through flights without having panic attacks. I've tried sitting in all seats and middle seats before, when I didn't have a choice, and those flights were absolutely miserable. Something about being able to see outside and having that sense of space and visual control is essential for keeping my anxiety at manageable levels. I stood there for probably 30 seconds trying to decide what to do, watching other passengers walk by and feeling increasingly anxious about the whole situation. Part of me wanted to just take the seat across from him and try to make the best of it, but I knew from experience that would likely result in a very unpleasant flight, where I'd spend the entire time fighting off panic attacks and nausea. Finally, I decided to ask the flight attendant for help, trying to keep my voice as quiet and polite as possible, so I wouldn't draw attention from other passengers or seem like I was making unreasonable demands. I walked over to where she was checking something on her tablet and said, "Excuse me, I was wondering if I could have my assigned window seat. I'm a very nervous flyer, and I'm prone to nausea if I'm not next to a window." I tried to explain it as briefly and matter-of-factly as possible, because I didn't want to get into the whole long story about my anxiety issues in front of a bunch of strangers. I hoped that mentioning nausea would be enough explanation without having to go into detail about panic attacks and trauma and all the complicated psychological stuff that goes along with my fear of flying. She looked at me with this slightly impatient expression, like I was being unreasonable for even asking about seat assignments, when she had just told us to sit anywhere. Her response was pretty curt: "No, we can't do that right now because we're about to close the door." Her tone was dismissive, like my request was an unnecessary complication that she didn't have time to deal with. I understood that she was under pressure to get the flight moving, but it felt frustrating because I wasn't asking for something unreasonable. I was asking for the seat that had actually been assigned to me in the upgrade. It seemed like having people sit in their assigned seats would actually be simpler than having everyone just pick random seats. But what do I know about airline operations for context? And I really don't mean to sound high maintenance or like I'm making excuses for being difficult, but I have pretty significant trauma around flying that goes back to when I was 8 years old. This isn't just regular nervousness or discomfort with turbulence, it's a legitimate phobia that stems from a specific traumatic event that happened during my childhood. My family was visiting my grandparents in this small town in Oregon during the summer, and we were at the tiny regional airport waiting for our flight back home to California. It was one of those small airports with only a few gates and big windows, where you can watch all the planes on the runway. We were sitting in the waiting area with our luggage, probably playing travel games or reading books like families do during airport delays. While we were sitting there, a small private plane was trying to land in some pretty bad weather. It was stormy and windy, which wasn't that unusual for that time of year, but the conditions were definitely challenging for a small aircraft. We were watching through the big terminal windows as the plane approached the runway, and something was clearly wrong with the approach. The plane came in way too fast and at too steep an angle. Instead of touching down smoothly on the runway, it clipped some trees at the end of the landing area and basically cartwheeled across the tarmac. In this terrifying shower of sparks and metal debris, the whole thing probably only lasted about 10 seconds, but it felt like it went on forever. The plane flipped over completely and skidded across the runway upside down, pieces of metal flying everywhere, emergency vehicles racing toward the crash site with sirens blaring. For an 8-year-old kid watching through an airport window, it was absolutely the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. I remember screaming and crying, and my parents trying to cover my eyes and get me away from the window. Miraculously, the pilot walked away with just some cuts and bruises and a concussion. But watching that plane cartwheel across the runway, seeing how quickly everything could go wrong, was permanently traumatizing for me. From that day forward, I was absolutely terrified of flying. Not just nervous or uncomfortable, legitimately panic attack level terrified. For years after that, I couldn't fly at all. My family had to drive everywhere we went, which really limited our vacation options and made visiting distant relatives complicated. When I started college and then my career, it became a real problem because so many opportunities require air travel. I was basically limiting my life choices based on my inability to get on airplanes. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s, probably around 28 or 29, that I finally found a therapist who specialized in anxiety disorders and trauma. Dr. Martinez has been working with me for about 12 years now, and we've made tremendous progress. The fact that I can get on planes at all is honestly huge considering where I started, but it still requires very specific coping mechanisms and a lot of preparation. Dr. Martinez and I have developed what we call my flight protocol, a series of steps and strategies that help me manage the anxiety and get through flights without having full panic attacks. It includes taking prescribed Xanax about an hour before boarding, having a window seat so I can see what's happening outside and feel less trapped, listening to my specially curated playlist of calming music, practicing specific breathing exercises, and having familiar comfort items like a book I've read many times when I get scared during flights, which is basically every moment from takeoff to landing. My stomach churns like I'm going to be physically sick. It's not just regular nervousness, it's this deep, visceral reaction that makes me feel like I might actually vomit. The nausea is real and intense, and it gets worse when I feel trapped or can't see outside. The window seat helps tremendously, because I can focus on the horizon and use visual cues to help with the motion sickness. Kind of like how people look at the horizon when they're seasick on boats. Being able to see outside also helps with the claustrophobia and feeling of being trapped in a metal tube thousands of feet in the air. Aisle seats make me feel exposed and vulnerable, like I can't control my environment, and middle seats are absolutely the worst because I feel completely trapped between other people. I don't love that this is how my body reacts to flying. I wish I could just put on headphones and take a nap like other passengers do, or work on my laptop or read a magazine casually. But this is what happens when your nervous system gets triggered by trauma, and I've learned to work with my limitations rather than fight them or pretend they don't exist. Dr. Martinez always emphasizes that trauma responses aren't logical or rational, they're deeply embedded neurological reactions that can't be reasoned away or overcome through willpower alone. She's helped me understand that needing specific accommodations to manage my anxiety isn't a character flaw or something to be ashamed of. It's just part of how my brain works after experiencing trauma, and managing it responsibly is actually a sign of strength and self-awareness. So when I asked the flight attendant for my assigned window seat, I wasn't being picky about first class amenities or trying to get special treatment. I was trying to access a specific accommodation that allows me to function during air travel. But of course she had no way of knowing any of that background, and I didn't feel comfortable sharing my entire trauma history with a stranger in front of other passengers. The older gentleman in my assigned window seat had apparently overheard my conversation with the flight attendant, including the part about being a nervous flyer and needing a window seat for nausea. He turned around in his seat and looked at me with this expression that was half confusion and half irritation, like he was trying to figure out whether I was being serious or just making up excuses. To get a better seat, after a moment he stood up and started gathering his things, clearly intending to give me the window seat. But instead of doing it with any kind of understanding or basic human kindness, he made this big dramatic show of rolling his eyes and letting out an exaggerated sigh. Then he said, loud enough for several other passengers to hear, "I've never heard of anyone throwing up because they're not in a window seat." His tone was so condescending and dismissive, like I had invented some ridiculous medical condition just to get my way. The way he said it made it clear that he thought I was either lying outright or being dramatically oversensitive about something minor. He acted like motion sickness wasn't a real thing, or like anxiety-related nausea was just an excuse people make up when they want better seats. Several other passengers turned to look at us when he made his comment, including a woman sitting across the aisle who was clearly trying to figure out what the drama was about. A couple of people further back were craning their necks to see what was happening in first class. I could feel my face getting hot and red from embarrassment, which always makes my anxiety worse. At this point I was mortified and could feel my heart rate picking up, which is usually the first sign that I'm heading toward a panic attack. The last thing I wanted was to be the center of attention, or to have a bunch of strangers thinking I was some kind of entitled passenger throwing a tantrum over seating arrangements. I also really didn't want to spend the next hour and a half sitting next to this guy, knowing that he clearly thought I was either lying or being ridiculous about my anxiety issues. The thought of sitting next to someone who had just publicly humiliated me, who would probably spend the whole flight rolling his eyes every time I showed any signs of nervousness, was honestly worse than sitting in an aisle seat. At least in an aisle seat I could suffer in relative privacy, without having to deal with judgmental comments from my seatmate. So I said, trying to keep my voice calm, and even despite feeling incredibly flustered, "Oh, this is clearly going to be a thing. Can I just have my original seat back?" I wasn't being sarcastic or confrontational. I genuinely just wanted to remove myself from the situation and get back to my original plan of sitting in premium economy, where I could have my window seat without causing drama or dealing with hostile passengers. The flight attendant looked visibly relieved that the whole situation was resolving itself quickly, without requiring any additional intervention from her. She checked something on her tablet and confirmed that my original seat, 1-2A, was still available since no one else had been moved there. I thanked her and started gathering all my stuff again, my purse, my carry-on bag, all my anxiety supplies that I had already unpacked and organized. The older gentleman settled back into seat 4F. muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear, but that definitely didn't sound friendly or apologetic. He was shaking his head like I had been completely unreasonable, even though he was the one who had taken my assigned seat and then made snarky comments. When I politely asked for it back, I made my way back to premium economy, feeling embarrassed and shaky from the whole interaction. Other passengers were looking at me as I walked past, probably wondering what had happened in first class and why I was moving back to a cheaper section. I'm sure some of them thought I had been kicked out for being difficult or demanding. When I got back to seat 1A, I was relieved to see that it was exactly as I had left it, window seat. Good location over the wing, familiar territory where I could use my normal coping strategies. I got settled again and tried to focus on my breathing exercises and calming music. But I was still pretty shaken up from the confrontation. I truly didn't care about missing out on the first class experience. The flight from LA to San Francisco is only about an hour and a half, so the extra legroom and free drinks weren't that big of a deal compared to having a seat that would allow me to manage my anxiety effectively. I would much rather sit in a basic economy window seat than a first class aisle seat when it comes to my mental health needs. But this whole interaction has been bothering me for days now, and I keep replaying it in my head trying to figure out if I handled it appropriately or if I could have done something differently. I've been going over every detail of the conversation, analyzing my tone and word choices, wondering if I came across as entitled or demanding or unreasonable. Was I wrong to ask for my assigned seat when the flight attendant had told us to just sit anywhere? Technically C for F was assigned to me according to the upgrade notification that came through the airline's app. I wasn't asking for someone else's seat or trying to get something I wasn't entitled to. I was asking for the specific seat that the airline had given me through their official upgrade system, but maybe in the context of just sit anywhere, I should have understood that specific seat assignments didn't matter anymore and that I should just be grateful for any first-class seat. Maybe flight attendants say just sit anywhere specifically because they don't want to deal with passengers arguing about assigned seats when they're trying to get the door closed quickly. Am I an entitled person in the eyes of the other passengers who witnessed this whole thing? I keep worrying that people saw it as me being difficult or demanding about luxury amenities, especially since it involved first-class seats, which can make people assume you're being precious about premium services, but for me it genuinely wasn't about the first-class perks. It was purely about needing a window seat for anxiety management. I wonder if other passengers understood that, or if they just saw someone complaining about their free upgrade and thought I was being ungrateful. The airline industry has created this culture where passengers are expected to be grateful for any treatment they receive, even when that treatment doesn't meet their basic needs or match what they pay for. Was the older gentleman wrong for the way he handled the situation? On one hand, he did ultimately offer to give me the seat, which I guess counts as doing the right thing eventually. He could have just ignored my request entirely and told me to deal with it. On the other hand, his comment about never hearing of anyone throwing up because they're not in a window seat was pretty cruel and dismissive. It bothers me that he assumed I was making up a fake medical issue just to get a better seat. Like, what would be the point of lying about motion sickness? Window seats aren't objectively better than aisle seats. Lots of people actually prefer aisle seats because they have easier access to the bathroom and can get up without climbing over other passengers. His assumption that I was being manipulative says more about his cynical worldview than it does about my honesty. The comment also showed a pretty fundamental lack of understanding about anxiety disorders and trauma responses. Just because he had never personally experienced motion sickness or anxiety-related nausea doesn't mean those things don't exist or aren't legitimate medical issues. It's like saying you don't believe in allergies because you've never had an allergic reaction. And what about the flight attendant's role in all this? Should she have just asked us to sit in our assigned seats from the beginning instead of telling us to sit anywhere? I understand that flight attendants are under enormous pressure to keep things moving quickly, especially when flights are running late and there are air traffic control delays. But it seems like having people sit in their assigned seats would actually be simpler and cause fewer problems than having everyone pick random seats and then deal with the inevitable conflicts that arise. Airlines spend a lot of time and technology on seat assignment systems. Why throw all that out the window during boarding just to save a few minutes? Maybe she was trying to be accommodating by giving us flexibility, but it ended up creating more drama and taking more time than if she had just directed us to our specific seats. Or maybe there's some airline policy I don't know about where upgraded passengers are supposed to sit anywhere in the upgraded cabin regardless of their assigned seat numbers. I've been going over this situation obsessively because I have another work trip coming up next week, and I'm worried about running into something similar. I'm wondering if I should have just accepted the aisle seat in first class and tried to manage my anxiety differently. even though I know from experience that doesn't work well for me. Or maybe I should have been more assertive about getting my assigned seat instead of accepting the flight attendant's initial no so easily. I could have explained that it was a medical accommodation issue rather than just a preference, but that would have required sharing more personal information than I was comfortable with in front of other passengers, or perhaps there was some other approach I could have taken that would have been better for everyone involved. Maybe I could have spoken privately with the flight attendant instead of having the conversation where other passengers could overhear. Maybe I could have offered to show her my upgrade notification to prove that I was actually assigned to that specific seat. My therapist always tells me that I have every right to advocate for my needs, especially when it comes to managing my anxiety and trauma responses. She says that asking for reasonable accommodations that help me function better isn't being difficult or entitled, it's being responsible about my mental health and taking care of myself in a healthy way. But in the moment, with that guy making his snarky comment and other passengers staring at me, it felt like I was being a problem passenger who was causing unnecessary drama over something trivial. There's this constant tension between advocating for my needs and not wanting to be seen as high maintenance or difficult. I also keep thinking about whether I should have explained my situation more clearly to help people understand why the window seat was important to me. Maybe if I had mentioned that I have a documented anxiety disorder and that window seats are part of my treatment plan, the flight attendant and the other passenger would have been more understanding and accommodating, but that feels like I shouldn't have to justify my medical needs with my entire psychiatric history just to get basic respect and consideration. Plus, there's always a risk that people will be even more dismissive if they think mental health issues aren't real medical problems deserving of accommodation. The thing that really gets to me is this assumption that I was lying or exaggerating about needing a window seat for nausea. Why would someone make that up? What would be the motivation for pretending to have motion sickness just to get a different seat? It's not like window seats are universally preferred. Plenty of people specifically request all seats because they find them more convenient. His comment revealed this underlying cynicism about OT, her people's motives and experiences that I find really troubling. It's like he automatically assumed that anyone asking for accommodations must be trying to game the system somehow, rather than genuinely needing help with a legitimate issue. I guess what I'm really grappling with is how to handle similar situations in the future in a way that gets me the accommodations I need while minimizing conflict and embarrassment. Flying is already stressful enough for me without having to worry about seat drama and judgmental comments from other passengers. Should I be more upfront about my anxiety disorder from the beginning, even though that means sharing personal medical information with strangers? Should I be more assertive about my assigned seats, even if it means potentially holding up flights or annoying flight crews? Should I just accept whatever seat I'm given and try to cope as best I can, even though I know that leads to miserable flights? I really don't want to be the kind of person who makes air travel more difficult for flight attendants and other passengers, but I also need to be able to manage my mental health in a way that actually works for me. It feels like there should be some middle ground where I can advocate for my needs without causing drama or seeming entitled. But I'm not sure exactly where that balance point is. The whole experience has left me feeling frustrated and uncertain about how to navigate these kinds of situations. One wish there was a clearer protocol for passengers with anxiety disorders, or better training for airline staff about mental health accommodations, or just more general understanding that not all medical needs are visible or immediately obvious to other people. For now, I'm planning to be more proactive about communicating my needs when I book flights, and maybe carrying some kind of documentation from my doctor that explains my accommodation needs in case I run into similar issues. But I still don't know if that would have made a difference in this particular situation, or if some people are just always going to be dismissive of mental health issues, regardless of how they're explained. I never thought I'd end up here writing this out on Reddit of all places, but maybe someone out there needs to read it. Maybe someone's going through the same shit I went through and needs to know they're not crazy for feeling what they're feeling. We were together for over a year and 3 months, if I'm being exact. What started as something real, something genuinely beautiful that I thought might actually be the one, eventually turned into the slow, subtle unraveling that I didn't even see coming at first. Looking back now, I can see that I felt the shifts way before they were actually visible to anyone on the outside. The delayed replies that went from immediate responses to hours, then eventually to days. The emotional distance that crept in like fog, so gradual you don't notice it until you're completely lost in it. The loss of physical intimacy that she explained away with work stress, family drama, just being tired all the time. It wasn't loud or dramatic like you see in movies, it was quiet, insidious. The kind of slow emotional withdrawal that makes you question your own sanity. Because there's no single moment you can point to and say that's when everything changed. It just fades. And you're left wondering if you're imagining things or being too needy or expecting too much. At first, like probably every person who's ever been in this situation, I blamed myself completely. I thought maybe I was slipping. As a boyfriend, maybe I wasn't interesting enough anymore. Maybe I wasn't giving her what she needed. Maybe I wasn't enough, attractive enough, successful enough, funny enough, whatever enough. I started analyzing every conversation we had, every text exchange, looking for clues about what I might have done wrong. I changed my behavior, tried to be more attentive, more understanding, more patient with her mood swings and the growing distance between us. I bent over backwards trying to figure out what she needed from me. But deep down, Micah knew better. There's this instinct you develop when you've been with someone long enough. This ability to sense when something is fundamentally off, even when you can't put your finger on exactly what it is. And Micah was screaming that there was someone else in the background, not officially, maybe not even physically yet, but emotionally. Someone lingering in her orbit, waiting in the wings, slowly pulling at her attention, while she tested the waters to see how much of myself I was willing to sacrifice to keep her around. I started noticing little things that individually meant nothing but together painted a pretty, clear picture. Her phone face down more often, new inside jokes I wasn't part of, references to conversations and experiences that somehow didn't include me. A certain energy she'd get when talking about work or her friend group that felt different from the energy she had when she was with me. She broke up with me once before, about 8 months into our relationship, said she needed space to figure herself out, that she wasn't sure what she wanted, that maybe we moved too fast. All the classic lines that people use when they want to explore other options, but keep you as a backup plan. And like an idiot, I apologized for things I didn't even do wrong. I begged her to reconsider, told her I'd give her all the space she needed, but that we could work through whatever was bothering her together. I made myself smaller and more accommodating, convinced that if I just tried harder and loved her better, she'd realize what she was giving up. She came back after about 3 weeks, said she missed me, that she'd made a mistake, that she realized how good we were together. I was so relieved and grateful that I didn't ask any of the questions I should have asked. I didn't want to rock the boat or seem like I didn't trust her. I just welcomed her back with open arms and pretended like those 3 weeks of hell never happened. But the second time, the final time, I saw it for what it really was. This wasn't confusion about what she wanted. This wasn't bad timing, or work stress or family pressure or any of the other excuses she'd been cycling through for months. It was betrayal, pure and simple. She'd been emotionally checking out of a relationship while keeping me around for comfort and security, probably building something with someone else while using me as her emotional safety net. The breakup wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the official announcement of something that had been happening for months. And this time, I didn't react the way she expected. I didn't chase or beg or ask for explanations or closure. When her breakup text came through, and yes, she broke up with me over text after more than a year together, I read it once and knew exactly what I needed to do. Her text said, "Hey, I've been thinking about our relationship and I see more negatives and positives. Let me know when we can meet up so I can explain to you why I'm ending this." Like she was doing me some kind of favor by offering to explain why I wasn't good enough anymore. My response was simple: thanks for everything, and I truly do wish you the best after that. I gave her the one thing she never expected and probably the one thing she feared most, the gift of my absence. No anger, even though I was furious. No guilt trips, even though I wanted to tell her exactly what I thought about her cowardly way of handling things. No late night texts asking for closure, or explanations, or one more chance to make things right. Just a dignified, calm goodbye that probably haunted her more than any dramatic reaction could have. And then I completely vanished from her world. I blocked her on social media immediately. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I knew that if I could still see her posts and stories, I'd be tempted to check them obsessively, looking for clues about what she was doing and who she was with. I'd torture myself analyzing every photo and caption for hidden meanings. I deleted her number from my phone so I wouldn't be tempted to text her in moments of weakness. I unfollowed her friends so their posts wouldn't accidentally show me glimpses of her life. I basically erased every digital connection we had, because I knew that staying connected would only prolong my healing process. What followed was honestly one of the strangest experiences of my life. This complete unraveling of someone who thought she had me figured out, who thought she knew exactly how I react, and how much power she had over my emotions. 28 reach-outs over the course of about 6 weeks. I counted them. It started with texts that I could see previews of on my lock screen before they got filtered to a hidden folder. Can we talk? I miss you. I'm a mess without you. Then it escalated to missed calls, 15 of them over the first 2 weeks. I never answered, never called back, never gave any indication that I was receiving her attempts to contact me. The messages got more desperate as time went on. You're being so nonchalant about this. I can't believe you're just ignoring me. This isn't like you. There was a 1 a.m. missed call on a Saturday night that told me everything I needed to know about how she was really doing. Someone who's happy and moved on doesn't call their ex at 1 a.m. on the weekend. She tried reaching out through social media too, even though I had her blocked. Apparently she could still see my stories from a mutual friend's account or something. Because I got this message request, you were undefeated, which I think was her way of acknowledging that my complete silence was affecting her more than any angry reaction would have. The messages got increasingly frantic. Please, I'm begging you, can we talk? I know you want nothing to do with me, but please, I really need to talk to you. I need to explain. Then came what was probably the most telling message of all. I'm not giving up on you. I even started therapy to work on my issues, and a large part of that was because of what I did to you. Please, can we talk? But here's the thing that really showed me who she was as a person. Never once, not in a single one of those 28 reach-outs, was there a real apology. Never once did she say I betrayed you. Never once did she say I'm sorry for how I treated you. Never once did she actually acknowledge what she had done wrong, or take responsibility for the way our relationship ended, because it was never actually about fixing what she broke or making amends for her behavior. It was about seeing if I'd let her feel okay about what she did. It was about getting me to respond so she could gauge whether she still had emotional power over me. It was about managing her own guilt and discomfort with how things ended. Not about genuine remorse for hurting me. I didn't give her what she was looking for. The silence I maintained wasn't just about protecting myself, although that was definitely part of it. It was also about refusing to participate in her guilt management project. I wasn't going to help her feel better about betraying me. I wasn't going to give her closure that she didn't deserve and hadn't earned. She started slipping online too, which I only found out about later through mutual friends who were genuinely concerned about both of us. At first, apparently, she kept up the whole show on social media, posting pictures of herself out at bars and parties, looking happy and carefree, showing off what looked like new relationship energy with someone else. But then, after every single one of her reach-outs was completely ignored, there was radio silence. The loudest kind of silence. She stopped posting altogether, stopped showing up in group photos, basically disappeared from social media entirely for several weeks. She even changed her profile photo from something that had symbolic meaning related to our relationship, a picture of herself wearing a watch and bracelet I'd given her, both engraved with a pet name I used to call her, back to just a regular selfie, as if pretending I never mattered would somehow make her feel less guilty about how everything ended. It was like watching someone try to erase history because the truth of what they'd done was too uncomfortable to live with. But you can't really erase someone who meant something to you. You can pretend they didn't matter, but the pretending itself proves that they did. Meanwhile, I stayed completely quiet through all of this. Not because I didn't feel pain, God. I felt all of it, the anger, the sadness, the confusion, the sense of betrayal, the loneliness, the wondering if I'd ever find something real again. There were nights when I lay awake replaying our entire relationship, trying to figure out when things started going wrong and what I could have done differently. There were moments when I wanted to respond to her messages, when I wanted to tell her exactly how much she'd hurt me, and how disappointed I was in the person she'd turned out to be. There were times when I wanted to ask for explanations, to demand answers about what had really been going on behind my back. But I stayed silent because I finally decided I was done performing for people who take my love for granted. I was done chasing people who had already made the decision to walk away. I was done trying to convince someone of my worth when they'd already shown me they didn't value what I brought to their life. The silence became my way of maintaining my dignity and self-respect. It became my way of saying I deserve better than this without having to actually say it. It became my way of refusing to participate in a dynamic where I begged for scraps of attention from someone who had thrown away something real. Some nights, especially in the beginning, I wondered what would have happened if she had just said, "I'm sorry for what I did to you." That's literally all it would have taken to make me acknowledge her existence. Not to come back to her, not to reconcile or give her another chance, but just to acknowledge that she was trying to reach out. A real apology. One that actually acknowledged the specific ways she'd hurt me, that took responsibility for her choices, that didn't try to justify or minimize what she'd done. Might have at least opened the door to some kind of civil goodbye conversation. But she never did that. She never took that step. And that told me everything I needed to know about whether she was actually capable of the kind of growth and accountability that would be necessary for any kind of healthy interaction, even as friends. So I let her feel the silence, the kind of silence that echoes back everything she was trying to avoid hearing about herself and her choices. The kind of silence that forces you to sit with the consequences of your actions, without any external validation or comfort. I think there's something powerful about refusing to engage with people who have shown you they don't respect you. There's something liberating about choosing your own peace over their comfort. There's something deeply satisfying about watching someone realize they can't manipulate or control you anymore. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to simply walk away without explanation, without drama, without trying to get the last word or make your point. Sometimes dignity and self-respect look like disappearing completely from someone's life when they've shown you they don't deserve access to your energy. It's been about 4 months now since that final breakup text, and I can honestly say I'm in a much better place mentally and emotionally. The initial pain and anger have mostly faded, replaced by a kind of peaceful acceptance and even gratitude for how things turned out. I'm grateful that she showed me who she really was before I invested even more time and emotional energy into someone who wasn't capable of the kind of partnership I was looking for. I'm grateful that I learned to trust my instincts when something feels off in a relationship. I'm grateful that I discovered my own capacity for walking away with dignity when someone treats me poorly. Most importantly, I'm grateful that I learned the power of silence as a response to people who tried to manipulate or control you. There's something incredibly freeing about refusing to engage in toxic dynamics, about choosing your own peace over someone else's drama. I've started dating again recently, and I find that I'm much more aware of red flags and much more willing to set boundaries early in relationships. I'm not willing to compromise my self-respect or chase someone who's not enthusiastically choosing me every day. I know now what it feels like to be valued and respected, and I won't accept anything less. Sometimes I still wonder how she's doing, if she ever figured out what she was really looking for, if she learned anything from how our relationship ended. But mostly, I hope she found whatever it was she thought she needed when she decided I wasn't enough. The truth is, some people aren't capable of appreciating what they have until it's gone, and even then, they're often more upset about losing control than they are about losing the actual person. Some people mistake drama and chaos for passion, and when you remove yourself from their chaos, they don't know how to process the calm. I used to think that love meant fighting for someone no matter what, that it meant never giving up, that it meant chasing and pursuing and trying to prove your worth. But I've learned that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to diminish yourself or beg for basic respect and consideration. Real love is reciprocal, it's consistent, it's honest, it doesn't leave you wondering where you stand or whether you matter. It doesn't require you to compete for attention or prove your worth over and over again. And if someone can't give you that kind of love, if they take your love for granted or treat it as disposable, then the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to take that love and give it to someone who will treasure it the way it deserves to be treasured. The silence I chose wasn't about revenge or punishment, although I'm sure it felt that way to her. It was about self-preservation and self-respect. It was about refusing to participate in a dynamic that was toxic for both of us. It was about choosing my own healing over her comfort, and honestly, it was the best decision I made in that entire situation. It allowed me to move forward without getting pulled back into the drama and confusion. It allowed me to heal without constantly reopening the wound. It allowed me to maintain my dignity and self-respect even in the face of betrayal. If you're reading this and you're going through something similar, I want you to know that you don't owe anyone your forgiveness, your understanding, or your emotional labor just because they decide they want it. You don't have to explain yourself to people who have already shown you they don't value your feelings or your perspective. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away and let your absence speak for itself. Sometimes silence is the most eloquent response to people who have treated you poorly. Sometimes the gift of your absence is exactly what someone needs to understand what they've lost. Trust your instincts, honor your worth, choose your peace, and don't be afraid to let people feel the full weight of losing someone who genuinely loved them, especially when they took that love for granted. Looking back now, I can see how the entire relationship was built on an uneven foundation from the very beginning. Though I was too caught up in the excitement of new love to recognize the patterns that would eventually destroy us, she had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in her world when she wanted something from me, but then treating me like an afterthought when she didn't need that validation or support. In the early days when everything felt magical and new, she'd text me constantly throughout the day. Good morning messages, random thoughts, photos of things that reminded her of me. She'd make plans weeks in advance, talk about trips we'd take together, joke about moving in together someday. It felt like she was just as invested in building something real as I was, but even then, there were these subtle inconsistencies that I brushed off. Because I was so happy to have found someone who seemed to understand me, she canceled plans last minute if something better came up with her friends. She'd go hours without responding to texts when she was out, but expect immediate responses from me. She'd make comments about her ex-relationships that made me uncomfortable, like how she probably settled too early or how she wondered what would have happened if certain relationships had worked out differently. I remember one night, probably about 4 months into dating, when we were lying in bed after spending the whole weekend together. She was scrolling through Instagram and came across a post from some guy she used to date in college. She showed me his picture and said something like, "God, he got so hot after we broke up." I probably should have given that another shot at the time. I laughed it off and made some joke about how she was stuck with me now. But thinking about it later, I realized how fucked up it was to say something like that to your current partner. Like, why would you think it's appropriate to tell someone you're supposedly building a future with that you regret not pursuing someone else? But I made excuses for behavior like that because I was already emotionally invested, and because she had this way of making me feel special in other moments that made me forget about the uncomfortable ones. She'd tell me I was different from anyone she'd dated before, that I understood her in ways other people didn't, that she felt like she could be her real self around me. What I didn't understand then was that people who are genuinely happy in their relationships don't constantly reference their past relationships or make their current partner feel like they're competing with ghosts. Secure people don't need to keep their options open or maintain emotional connections with people they used to date. The first real red flag that I should have paid attention to was how she handled conflict in our relationship. Whenever we had disagreements or I brought up something that was bothering me, she had this way of making it seem like I was being overly sensitive or demanding too much from her. I remember trying to talk to her about how it made me feel when she'd be on her phone constantly when we were together, scrolling through social media, or responding to texts while I was trying to have conversations with her. Instead of acknowledging that this might be hurtful or disrespectful, she turned it around and said I was being clingy and controlling. She'd say things like, "I need my independence, and you can't expect me to give you my undivided attention every second we're together," which, okay, fair enough, everyone needs some personal space and time to maintain other relationships. But there's a difference between healthy independence and being so distracted by other people and other options that you can't be present with the person you're supposedly choosing to be with. Another pattern I started noticing was how she talked about our relationship to other people. When we were with my friends or family, she'd be affectionate and engaged, playing the part of the devoted girlfriend perfectly. But when we were with her friends, I often felt like an accessory or an afterthought. Her friends would make plans right in front of me without including me, and she'd just go along with it instead of saying something like, "That sounds fun, but I'd like to bring my boyfriend if that's okay." I'd sit there feeling invisible while they talked about inside jokes and shared experiences. That deliberately excluded me when I brought this up to her. She said I was being insecure and that I couldn't expect to be included in everything she did with her friends. Again, technically true, but the way she handled it made it clear that I wasn't a priority in her social life. I was someone she spent time with when it was convenient, not someone she was proud to include in all aspects of her life. The emotional distance I mentioned earlier didn't happen overnight. It was this gradual pulling back that was so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Conversations that used to be deep and meaningful became surface level. Inside jokes stopped developing between us. She stopped asking about my day or my goals or my thoughts about things that mattered to me. Sex became less frequent and more mechanical. She stopped initiating physical intimacy entirely, and when I did, there was this sense that she was just going through the motions to keep me satisfied rather than because she genuinely wanted to connect with me that way. But probably the most painful part was watching her emotional energy shift toward other people. She'd come home from work or social events completely lit up talking about conversations she'd had with coworkers or friends, but then seemed drained and disinterested when it came to spending quality time with me. There was this one guy at her work, Marcus, who started featuring more and more prominently in her stories about her day. At first it was just casual mentions. "Marcus said the funniest thing at lunch today," or "Marcus and I had to work late on this project together." But gradually it became clear that they were developing the kind of connection that she and I used to have. She lit up when talking about him in ways that she hadn't lit up when talking about me. In months, she'd share little details about his life and his personality that showed she was paying close attention to who he was as a person. She started staying late at work more often, and when I'd ask what she was working on, it always seemed to involve projects with Marcus. When I asked her directly if there was something going on between them, she got defensive and accused me of being paranoid and jealous. She said they were just friends and that it was normal to have close relationships with coworkers. But I could feel in my gut that whatever was happening between them was taking emotional energy away from our relationship. The really insidious part was how she made me feel like I was crazy for noticing these changes. Gaslighting is such an overused term these days, but that's exactly what it was. She denied that anything had changed between us, insist that I was being overly sensitive, and make me question my own perceptions about what was happening in my own relationship. I started keeping track of things just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. How often we had meaningful conversations. How often she initiated physical affection. How often she seemed genuinely happy to see me when I came over or when she came home from work. And all of those things were measurably declining. But whenever I brought it up, she'd act like I was being ridiculous. The first breakup, the one where I chased her and begged her to come back, happened right around the time when Marcus got promoted to a different department. Suddenly she was questioning everything about our relationship, saying she needed space to figure out what she wanted, that maybe we'd moved too fast. I should have seen it for what it was. Her testing whether she could do better, whether the grass was greener somewhere else. But I was so terrified of losing her that I was willing to accept any explanation. That didn't involve her wanting someone else. When she came back after those 3 weeks, she seemed different, more distant, more guarded, like she was keeping part of herself held back just in case she needed to leave again. The intimacy we built over more than a year together never fully returned. It was like she decided I was good enough for now, but she wasn't closing the door on other possibilities. That's when I should have walked away. That's when I should have realized that someone who genuinely wanted to be with me wouldn't have left in the first place, and definitely wouldn't have come back with one foot still out the door. But I was so grateful to have her back that I didn't ask the hard questions. I didn't demand the kind of commitment and certainty that I deserved. I just accepted that this was the new normal, a relationship where I always felt like I was auditioning for the role of her boyfriend, where I never felt secure or confident that she was choosing me wholeheartedly. The second breakup, the final one, happened when Marcus transferred back to her department. Suddenly she was working late again, coming home with stories about him again, letting up in ways that had nothing to do with me again. But this time I was paying attention. This time I trusted my instincts instead of letting her convince me I was being paranoid. I didn't confront her about it because I knew she'd just deny it and make me feel crazy again. Instead, I started emotionally preparing myself for what I knew was coming. I started rebuilding my sense of self outside of our relationship. I started reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. I started remembering who I was before I met her. So, when that breakup text came, when she tried to frame it as her doing me a favor by explaining why I wasn't good enough anymore, I was ready. I wasn't the same person who had chased her and begged her to reconsider the first time. I was someone who finally understood my own worth and wasn't willing to beg anyone to see it. The 28 reach-outs that followed weren't really about missing me or regretting her decision. They were about her realizing that she'd lost control over someone she'd taken for granted. They were about her discovering that I wasn't going to be her backup plan or her ego boost, or her emotional support system while she figured out what she really wanted. Some of the messages were manipulative, in ways that I can see clearly now but might not have recognized if I was still emotionally invested. Like when she said, "You're being so nonchalant about this." That was her trying to make me feel guilty for not being devastated enough, for not giving her the dramatic reaction that would have confirmed she still had power over my emotions. Or, when she mentioned starting therapy because of what I did to you, that was her trying to get credit for self-improvement, without actually taking responsibility for her actions. She wanted me to be impressed that she was working on herself, but she still couldn't bring herself to actually apologize for how she treated me. The most telling message was probably, "I'm not giving up on you," because it revealed that she still thought this was about her winning me back rather than her acknowledging the ways she'd hurt me. She was treating our relationship like a game she was determined to win, rather than a bond between two people that she'd broken through her choices. Every message was designed to get a response, to pull me back into her orbit so she could feel like she still mattered to me. But responding would have meant participating in her guilt management project, helping her feel better about her choices, instead of requiring her to sit with the consequences of her actions. The silence I maintained wasn't just about protecting myself from further manipulation. It was about refusing to enable her pattern of treating people poorly, and then expecting them to help her feel okay about it. It was about not rewarding bad behavior with attention and emotional labor. There's something really powerful about discovering that you can survive someone's absence, that you can build a fulfilling life without the person you thought you couldn't live without. The first few weeks were genuinely hard. I'd reach for my phone to text her about random things. or see something that reminded me of her and feel that sharp pang of loss. But as time went on, I started remembering what it felt like to not constantly worry about someone else's mood or approval. I started enjoying the peace that comes with not having to analyze every interaction for hidden meanings or signs that someone is pulling away from you. I started dating myself again, taking myself to movies I wanted to see, trying restaurants I was curious about, pursuing hobbies that had gotten neglected during the relationship. I remembered that I'm actually pretty good company when I'm not anxiously trying to be whatever someone else needs me to be. The growth that happened during those months of silence was profound. I learned to trust my instincts instead of letting other people convince me that my perceptions were wrong. I learned that my peace of mind was more valuable than anyone's approval or validation. I learned that sometimes loving someone means refusing to participate in dynamics that are unhealthy for both of you. Most importantly, I learned that there's a difference between giving up on someone and refusing to enable their worst behaviors. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop making it easy for someone to take you for granted. Sometimes people need to feel the full weight of losing someone good before they can understand what they had. I don't know if she ever learned those lessons. I don't know if she figured out what she was really looking for or if she's still chasing the fantasy of something better instead of appreciating what's real and available to her. But I know that letting her feel my silence was the right choice for both of us. Even if it didn't feel good for either of us at the time, the experience taught me that closure doesn't always come from conversations or explanations. Sometimes closure comes from choosing your own peace over someone else's comfort. Sometimes it comes from refusing to participate in dynamics that diminish your sense of self-worth. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply disappear from someone's life when they've shown you they don't deserve access to your energy, leaving them to sit with the echo of their own choices. My husband and I are getting a divorce, and honestly I'm still trying to process everything that went wrong over our 5 years together. I keep going over all these little things that happened and it feels like I've been cheated on emotionally, even though he never physically hooked up with anyone else as far as I know. I guess I'm posting this because I need to get it all out somewhere and see if I'm crazy for feeling so betrayed by all this shit. This is going to be long as hell, but I need to tell someone who doesn't know me personally. We got married when I was 23 and he was 24. We'd been dating for about 2 years before that. Met in college through mutual friends at this house party. He was my second serious relationship and I was his first everything, first girlfriend, first sexual partner, first person he said I love you to, all of it. I thought that was incredibly sweet at the time, like I was special because he waited for the right person. Now I'm wondering if that was actually a huge red flag I completely missed because he had no fucking clue what he was doing in a relationship. Looking back, there were signs even during our dating phase that I should have paid attention to. He was always really interested in other girls, like commenting on their looks when we'd watch movies or shows together. He'd point out attractive women when we were out, and ask if I thought they were pretty too, like he was trying to get me to participate in checking out other women with him. At the time I thought he was just being open and honest, but now I realize he was probably testing boundaries to see what he could get away with. I'll explain each thing he did over the course of our relationship that made me feel like complete garbage. And honestly, there's so much that I'm not even sure I'll remember everything. But these are the major incidents that really fucked with my head and made me feel like I was competing with every other woman on the planet for my own husband's attention. First major thing that happened was in the very beginning of our relationship, maybe 6 months in when things were getting serious, and we were talking about moving in together. I was using his phone to look something up because mine was dead, and I accidentally opened this calculator app that turned out to be hiding a bunch of nude photos. Not just random porn screenshots or whatever, but actual nudes that girls had sent him before we got together. We're talking like 15 or 20 different girls here, some from high school, some from his brief college dating phase before we met, even a few from dating apps he'd used. The photos were organized in folders with the girls' names on them, like he had this whole system set up. Some of the folders had multiple photos from the same girl, including videos in a few cases. When I confronted him about it, he acted like it was no big deal and said he forgot they were there. Like how the actual fuck do you forget you have a secret stash of ex-girlfriends and hookups nudes hidden on your phone while you're in what is supposed to be a committed relationship? He said he'd delete them all, which he did in front of me. But the fact that he thought it was okay to keep them in the first place really messed with my head. I tried to let it go because we were still pretty new as a couple, and I didn't want to be the crazy, controlling girlfriend who went through his phone and made a big deal about his past. But it definitely planted this seed of insecurity that just kept growing over the years. Like if he was keeping nudes from other girls, what else was he hiding from me? The second thing that really started to bother me was his constant use of Reddit and iFunny to look at pictures of hot girls. And I don't mean just casual browsing, this dude was actively seeking out subreddits, specifically for posting photos of attractive women, spending hours scrolling through them, and leaving comments like, "Where are the girls like this at, and damn wish I could find someone who looked like this in real life." The comments were public too, so anyone who looked at his profile could see my boyfriend basically advertising that he wished he was with someone who looked different than me. When I brought it up and asked why he felt the need to comment on other women's photos, he said I was being too sensitive and that it was just guy talk that didn't mean anything. But like, if it didn't mean anything, why was he doing it multiple times every single day? Why was he taking time out of his day to tell random women on the internet how attractive he found them? And why did he get so defensive when I asked him to maybe tone it down a little? He also started following a bunch of Instagram accounts that were basically just hot girls posting thirst traps. His entire feed was models and influencers in bikinis and revealing outfits. When I pointed out that this seemed excessive, he said I was trying to control what he looked at online, and that all guys follow accounts like that. Third thing, and this one really fucked with my self-esteem for years, was that our sex life was honestly pretty terrible from the very beginning. He would only last maybe 2 or 3 minutes max, sometimes less than that, and he could never go multiple rounds no matter how much time we had, or how much I tried to help him relax and take his time with foreplay. At first I thought maybe he was just nervous because I was his first serious sexual partner, so I tried to be patient and understanding. I suggested we work on it together, maybe try different techniques or positions that might help him last longer, but he always got defensive and said there was nothing wrong with him, that I was expecting too much. But here's the really fucked up part, he would jerk off multiple times a day, every single day. Like I'd wake up in the morning and he'd already be in the bathroom masturbating before work. I'd come home from my job and catch him doing it again in the living room. Before bed, same thing. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him jerking off next to me in bed, while he thought I was sleeping. It was like he had unlimited stamina and energy for porn and masturbation, but couldn't last more than a few minutes with his actual girlfriend who he claimed to love and be attracted to. When I tried to talk to him about it, suggesting maybe he could save some of that sexual energy for us to enjoy together, he got really angry and said I was trying to control his body and his sexuality. The frequency was honestly insane too. I'm talking like 4 or 5 times a day minimum. There were days when I'd find evidence that he'd masturbated 6 or 7 times. Tissues in the trash, his laptop still warm with porn sites in the browser history, obvious signs in the bathroom. Meanwhile, we were having sex maybe once or twice a week, and it was always disappointing for both of us. Fourth thing was how his porn consumption escalated over time in ways that made me super uncomfortable. At first it was just regular porn sites, which I honestly didn't have a huge problem with initially. I understood that most guys watch porn and I didn't want to be the girlfriend who tried to ban it completely. But then he started jerking off 2 girls on Instagram and TikTok instead of actual porn because he said it felt more personal. Think about how fucked up that logic is. He preferred masturbating to random girls on social media, who he could theoretically actually meet, message, or interact with, rather than actual porn stars who are completely out of reach and doing it as their job, he said. It was more exciting, because these were real girls he could potentially contact if he wanted to. When I told him that made me really uncomfortable and felt way too close to actual cheating, he said I was being controlling, and that it was essentially the same as watching porn. But it's not the same thing at all. These are real women posting regular content about their daily lives, who he could easily slide into their DMs if he wanted to take it further. Some of these girls lived in our same city. A few of them he actually knew from high school or college, and was following their personal accounts. He also started seeking out more and more specific types of content. Like he'd find girls who looked similar to people we knew in real life, or who had particular physical features that I didn't have. It felt like he was using these social media girls to fulfill fantasies about specific women in his life while using me as a convenient substitute for actual intimacy. Fifth major issue was when he straight up told me that he sometimes wondered what it would be like to be with other people, and that he struggled with the fact that I was his first serious relationship. He said he felt like he missed out on experiences that most guys have in their 20s, and that sometimes he resented me for tying him down so young. This conversation happened after we'd been married for about 2 years and had just had our first kid. We were going through a rough patch. I was exhausted from being a new mom. He was complaining about feeling trapped and overwhelmed by responsibilities. I was trying to be a supportive wife and encourage honest communication about what was bothering him. Instead, I got to hear about how he felt like he'd settled down too early and never got to play the field like his single friends. He talked about wondering what it would be like to date different types of women, to have casual hookups, to experience that freedom that he felt like he'd never had. He tried to backtrack when he saw how devastated I was, saying that he loved me and didn't actually want to be with anyone else. But the damage was completely done. How are you supposed to feel secure in your marriage when your husband tells you he wonders about other women and feels like he missed out on life by being with you? That conversation really marked the beginning of the end for me. Even though it took me another 2 years to finally leave, I started feeling like I was this burden he was carrying around. This obligation that was preventing him from living his best life. Sixth thing, and this one still makes me physically sick to think about, was when he admitted to having sexual fantasies about my younger sister and actually masturbating while thinking about her in her own bathroom when we visited for Christmas. My sister Emma is 25, married with 2 kids, and was just being a normal host wearing normal clothes in her own house. This confession came up during another one of our honest communication sessions where I was desperately trying to understand why he seemed so distant and uninterested in our relationship. He said he felt guilty about it and wanted to come clean, and that he was uncomfortable with her wearing revealing clothing around the house, like he was some kind of hero for admitting he was attracted to my sister. Like, what the actual fuck? First of all, she wasn't wearing anything revealing. She was wearing normal summer clothes like tank tops and shorts in her own house during a heat wave. Second, you don't get credit for admitting you jerked off while thinking about my sister in her own bathroom, and where she brushes her teeth with her kids every night. When I asked him why he thought it was appropriate to tell me something like that, he said he didn't want to have secrets between us and that honesty was important in marriage. But some secrets exist for a fucking reason. Some thoughts should stay in your head and die there, not become your wife's problem to deal with and process. The worst part was that he tried to make it seem like my sister was somehow at fault for existing in her own home and wearing weather-appropriate clothing. Like she was supposed to know that her brother-in-law was a creep who couldn't control himself around family members. After that, I felt so uncomfortable visiting my sister and couldn't look at her the same way for months. Every family gathering became this minefield where I was watching his behavior and wondering what gross thoughts he was having about my female relatives. Seventh major issue was that he also admitted to constantly fantasizing about coworkers, random women he saw in public, basically any attractive woman he encountered in his daily life. Again, this came up during his honesty phase where he thought confessing everything would somehow make our relationship stronger and more authentic. He said he couldn't help it and that all guys do it, which first of all is not true, and second of all, most guys don't tell their wives about every single woman they want to sleep with. He made it sound like I should be grateful for his transparency. But honestly, I would have preferred he kept that shit to himself and worked on it with a therapist instead. He would describe these fantasies in detail, like what he imagined doing with them and how often he thought about specific women. There was this one coworker, Sarah, who he talked about constantly. He knew details about her personal life that seemed inappropriate for a casual work relationship, and he'd bring her up in conversations for no reason. Every time we went out somewhere after these confessions, I was constantly wondering if he was mentally undressing every woman we encountered. Going to the grocery store became stressful because I catch him staring at other women and wonder if he was adding them to his fantasy rotation. I felt like I was competing with literally every woman on the planet for my own husband's attention. Eighth thing, and this became a consistent pattern that lasted our entire marriage, was how he handled any time I tried to express discomfort about his behavior. Every single time I brought up something that was bothering me or tried to set reasonable boundaries, he would immediately turn it around and make himself the victim. I'd try to explain why something hurt my feelings or made me feel insecure, and he'd start this whole dramatic self-flagellation routine about how he was a terrible person, a loser, a failure as a husband, how he didn't deserve me, how I should just leave him for someone better. It was like emotional manipulation disguised as self-awareness. The routine was always the same. I'd bring up a legitimate concern. He'd spend 20 minutes talking about what a piece of shit he was, and then I'd end up comforting him and reassuring him that he wasn't a bad person instead of actually addressing the behavior that was hurting me. Looking back, I realized he was manipulating me every single time. He never actually apologized for anything or tried to change his behavior. He just made me feel guilty for having normal expectations about fidelity and respect in marriage. He trained me to avoid bringing up problems, because it always resulted in me having to manage his emotions instead of getting my needs met. Sometimes these conversations would go on for hours, with him crying and talking about his childhood trauma, and how damaged he was. until I was completely emotionally drained and just wanted the conflict to end. By the end, I'd be apologizing to him for bringing up the issue in the first place. Ninth major problem was his relationship with this married coworker named Jessica. That I'm pretty sure was a full-blown emotional affair, even though nothing physical happened as far as I know. His behavior around her was so obvious and inappropriate that it was honestly embarrassing. He would always go out of his way to join group activities if she was going to be there, like if coworkers were going out for drinks after work and she was going. Suddenly, he was super interested in being social and building workplace relationships. If she wasn't going, he'd make excuses about being tired or having other plans. He started staying late at work more often when I knew she was also working late. He'd come home with stories about their conversations and inside jokes they shared. He knew way too much about her personal life and problems with her husband. When she was going through a rough patch in her marriage, he was suddenly very invested in giving her advice and being a supportive friend. The way he talked about her was completely different from how he talked about any other coworker. His voice would change. He'd get this little smile. He'd bring her up in conversations that had nothing to do with work. When I pointed out that he seemed to have a crush on her, he got defensive and said I was being paranoid and jealous. He also became really close friends with this other guy at work, Mike, who had similar toxic attitudes about marriage and relationships. Mike was always complaining about his wife, saying she was controlling and demanding and didn't understand how hard he worked. My husband would come home and repeat all of Mike's opinions, like they were profound wisdom about marriage. Mike never helped out at home with housework or childcare, was moody and difficult with his family, basically treated his wife like hired help, and thought any expectations she had were unreasonable nagging. My husband started adopting the same attitude, like I was this burden he had to deal with instead of his partner, who was trying to build a life together. He'd come home complaining about how Mike's wife was always on his case about stupid stuff, like helping with dinner or spending time with their kids. Then he'd look at me like I was just as unreasonable when I asked him to help with basic household responsibilities or family activities. 10th major issue was that he absolutely refused to take us anywhere or do anything as a family. I would beg him to take us to the park, or out to dinner, or to family-friendly events in our community, or literally anywhere that wasn't our house. He always said he was too tired from work, or didn't have energy, or would agree to go and then pout and be miserable the entire time we were out. The only place we ever went regularly was Walmart, which was 40 minutes away from our house. We'd make this trip twice a week just so I could get out of the house with our kids and feel like we were doing something together as a family. That was our only family outing, grocery shopping at fucking Walmart. How depressing is that? I tried planning other activities constantly. I'd suggest day trips to nearby attractions, walks around the neighborhood, visits to playgrounds, going to farmers markets, basically anything that would get us out of the house and create positive memories with our children. But he'd always find excuses or make it so unpleasant that I'd eventually stop asking. If I managed to convince him to come somewhere with us, he'd spend the entire time on his phone, complaining about being tired, or making comments about how expensive everything was. He'd rush us through activities and make it clear he wanted to go home as soon as possible. The kids could sense his mood and would get cranky, which would make him even more miserable. Our kids are now 3 and 18 months old, and I realized they've barely been anywhere except Walmart, Target, and maybe the occasional doctor's appointment. I felt like I was failing them as a mother because their dad wouldn't participate in creating the kind of childhood experiences that kids need. When I brought this up in couples therapy, he said he didn't see the point in spending money on activities when we could just stay home and save money, but it wasn't about money. Most of the things I suggested were free or very cheap. It was about him not wanting to put any effort into being a present, engaged father and husband. 11th thing, and this was really the final straw that made me realize our marriage was completely over, happened when our son was only 2 months old. I found messages on Discord between him and this girl Ashley from high school. That completely destroyed any remaining trust I had. They used to play online games together back in school, and had stayed very loosely in touch over the years, through social media, but hadn't actually talked in probably 3 or 4 years. The messages I found were him reaching out to her completely out of the blue, clearly trying to rekindle some kind of connection. He started with casual stuff like asking how she'd been, and what she was up to these days. But it quickly escalated to him saying things like, "I bet you're still as gorgeous as you were in high school," and asking about her relationship status in ways that were obviously him fishing for an opening to flirt. Or more, he was telling her about how marriage was harder than he expected, how he felt trapped and overwhelmed by responsibility, basically setting up this narrative where he was this poor guy who needed sympathy and understanding. He was clearly hoping she'd respond with something flirty or encouraging that would give him permission to take it further. She completely ghosted him after his first few messages, which honestly made me feel embarrassed for him on top of being absolutely furious. Like he couldn't even successfully emotionally cheat because women could immediately see the red flags and desperation that I had been blind to for years. When I confronted him about the messages, he said it didn't mean anything, and that he was just being friendly and trying to reconnect with an old friend. But you don't message someone you haven't talked to in years to tell them you bet they're still gorgeous if you're just being friendly. That's not how platonic friendship works, and we both knew it. The timing made it even more devastating. Our baby was literally 2 months old. I was completely exhausted from breastfeeding every 2 hours. My body was still recovering from childbirth. I was dealing with postpartum depression. And I was trying to take care of a newborn and an 18-month-old basically by myself instead of supporting me during one of the most difficult periods of my life. He was trying to hook up with girls from high school on Discord, while I was up all night with our baby. He was staying up late messaging other women and complaining about how hard his life was. That's when I realized that nothing I did was ever going to be enough. For him, I could be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, give him everything he said he wanted, and he'd still be looking for something else. Someone else, some other life that would make him happier. All this to say, I loved that man with absolutely everything I had. I gave him 5 years of my life, had 2 beautiful children with him, and truly believed we could work through anything except actual physical cheating. And he knew that. I had always been completely clear that infidelity in any form was my hard boundary that I wouldn't cross. I was always a huge communicator in our relationship. I knew exactly what I wanted and needed from a partner, and I wasn't shy about expressing it clearly and directly. I tried so hard to be everything he needed: supportive, understanding, fun, low maintenance, sexually available, emotionally available. All of it. I think I was a really good wife, despite what he tried to make me believe about myself. I know I'm a great mother to our kids, and honestly I think I'm pretty attractive too. So I've been completely distraught trying to figure out where I went wrong, and what I could have done differently to save our marriage. But then I remember that Megan Fox got cheated on, Beyonce got cheated on, Jennifer Aniston got cheated on. Some of the most beautiful, successful, talented women in the world have been betrayed by men who had everything and still wanted more. So clearly it's not about how attractive or perfect or accommodating you are as a partner. Some people are just fundamentally not capable of being faithful or appreciating what they have. They're always going to be looking for the next thing, the next person, the next experience that they think will finally make them happy. But happiness doesn't come from other people. It comes from within, and he was never going to find that. No matter how many women he fantasized about or tried to connect with. We were genuinely best friends for most of our relationship, which is part of what made this so confusing and painful. I could have him on the floor dying laughing, completely out of breath because he said I was the funniest person he'd ever met. He always told me he was so happy he married me, because I was different from any girl he'd ever been around. He loved that I played video games with him and his friends, instead of complaining about his hobbies taking up too much time. He loved that I was always down to try new things and join whatever activity he got interested in, even if it wasn't something I would have chosen for myself. I learned to play D&D for him and actually got really into it. I got interested in board games and helped him build this huge collection. I tried some of his more nerdy interests like anime and certain video game genres, because I wanted to share those experiences with him and understand what he was passionate about. Now I'm wondering if he only liked me because I was funny and accommodating and didn't cause problems. Like maybe I was just the cool girlfriend who went along with whatever he wanted to do, and didn't have strong opinions or needs of my own. Maybe he saw me as his fun sidekick rather than an actual partner. Looking back, he never showed any real interest in my hobbies or passions. I love reading and writing. I'm into fitness and hiking. I have opinions about politics and social issues that I care about. But he never asked me about any of that stuff or seemed to care what I thought about anything important. He never asked me how my day was when I got home from work. He never asked for my thoughts on major decisions we needed to make as a couple. He never valued my opinion about financial choices, parenting decisions, or future plans. He never came to me for advice about work problems or personal issues, even though I'm actually pretty good at giving thoughtful guidance. Meanwhile, I'd sit there for hours every single day listening to him rant about work drama, problems with his friends, whatever was bothering him that particular day. I'd give him really thoughtful advice and try to help him work through his issues, like a good partner should. But half the time I could tell he was just completely zoning out while I talked. Like I was background noise he had to tolerate. He'd be on his phone or playing games while I was trying to have serious conversations about our relationship or our future. All the things I'd say to try to make him feel better about himself, he said made him feel worse. I'd try to build up his confidence and remind him of his good qualities when he was feeling down. And he'd tell me I was being fake or that I didn't really understand how terrible he was as a person. He eventually went on antidepressants, but honestly, I started to think that I was the main thing causing his depression, because he just fundamentally didn't want to be with me anymore. He wanted the fantasy of being single and dating around and having all these exciting experiences, but he also wanted the security and comfort of having a wife and family at home. The medication didn't help our relationship issues at all. If anything, it made him more emotionally distant and less interested in working on our problems together. He said it helped stabilize his mood, but he was still just as selfish and inconsiderate as before, just less dramatic about it. I spent literally years trying to figure out what I was doing wrong and why he seemed so chronically unhappy despite having everything he said he wanted: a wife who loved him, beautiful healthy kids, a nice home, financial stability, friends, hobbies he enjoyed. I changed myself in so many ways trying to be the wife he needed. I became more supportive and less demanding. I stopped bringing up problems that bothered me because it always turned into him having a breakdown about what a terrible person he was. I took on more household responsibilities so he wouldn't feel overwhelmed. I gave him more space and freedom to pursue his interests. But absolutely nothing I did was ever enough because the fundamental problem wasn't anything I was or wasn't doing. The problem was that he wanted to be married to someone while also having the freedom to pursue other women without consequences. He wanted all the benefits of having a committed partner without any of the actual commitment or sacrifice that marriage requires. He wanted a wife who would take care of him, support him emotionally and financially, give him children, manage the household, and never complain when he treated her like she was disposable. He wanted me to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention he felt like giving me while he invested his real emotional energy in fantasizing about other women. The Discord messages were just the final confirmation of what I had been feeling for years, that he wasn't really present in our marriage. He was always looking for something else, someone else, some other life that would make him feel the way he thought he deserved to feel. I tried everything to save our relationship. We did couples therapy for almost a year, where he would agree to make changes and then go right back to the same patterns as soon as we left the session. I tried individual therapy to figure out what I might be doing to contribute to our problems. I read probably 20 different relationship books and tried implementing all kinds of strategies for better communication, more intimacy, rebuilding trust. I suggested date nights, weekend getaways without the kids, new activities we could try together to reconnect. Nothing worked because he wasn't actually interested in fixing our marriage or becoming a better partner. He was interested in keeping me around as a reliable backup plan while he figured out if he could find something better or more exciting elsewhere. The hardest part of accepting that our marriage was over was realizing that I really thought we were best friends underneath all the relationship drama. We had so many genuinely good times together, so many inside jokes and shared experiences and conversations that lasted hours. When he wasn't being shitty about other women or neglecting his responsibilities, he genuinely seemed to enjoy my company and value our friendship. We could talk about random stuff for hours, and he'd tell me I was his favorite person to hang out with. But I'm understanding now that friendship isn't nearly enough to build a marriage on if there's no respect, loyalty, or real commitment underneath it. He might have liked hanging out with me and found me entertaining, but he didn't respect me as his wife, as the mother of his children, or as a human being who deserved basic consideration. A real partner doesn't constantly fantasize about other people and then make their spouse feel guilty for being uncomfortable with it. A real partner doesn't try to hook up with women from their past while their wife is home alone taking care of their newborn baby at 2 a.m. I kept making excuses for him for way too long because I loved him so much, and because I desperately wanted our family to stay together. I told myself that everyone has intrusive thoughts sometimes, that attraction to other people is totally normal in long-term relationships, that maybe I was being desensitive about his behavior. But there's a huge difference between occasionally noticing someone attractive and actively pursuing detailed sexual fantasies about other women, while completely neglecting your actual wife's needs. There's a difference between normal human attraction and telling your spouse about every single person you want to sleep with. I feel incredibly stupid for staying as long as I did, and for trying so hard to make something work with someone who clearly didn't want to be there. My friends and family kept telling me that something seemed really off about our relationship dynamic, but I defended him every single time. I thought they just didn't understand our situation, or that they were being judgmental about his struggles with depression and anxiety. I made excuses for behavior that I never should have tolerated. And I ignored my own instincts when they were telling me something was fundamentally wrong. Now I'm kicking myself for not listening to the people who cared about me and could see what I couldn't see from the inside of the relationship. They watched him treat me like I was completely disposable, while I kept making excuses for why he was acting that way. The divorce process has been really emotionally difficult because part of me still loves the person I thought he was for so long. I love the version of him that existed when we were just hanging out and having fun together, before I understood how little he actually valued me as a partner. But that person apparently wasn't real, or at least wasn't strong enough to overcome his selfishness and his constant need for validation from other women. The man I fell in love with wouldn't have treated me the way he did, which means either he was never that person to begin with, or he changed into someone I don't recognize. I'm trying really hard to focus on the fact that my kids and I deserve so much better than someone who's always looking for the exit. They deserve a father who's fully present and committed to their family, not someone who's constantly fantasizing about other women and making their mother feel inadequate and unwanted. I'm also working on rebuilding my self-esteem after years of being made to feel like I wasn't attractive enough, funny enough, interesting enough, or just generally enough of anything to keep my own husband's attention. It's hard to trust my own judgment about relationships and people now, because I was so completely wrong about him for such a long time. I thought I knew him better than anyone else in the world. I thought we had this deep connection and understanding of each other. But clearly I was just seeing what I wanted to see and ignoring all the evidence that he wasn't the person I believed him to be. The worst part is feeling like I wasted the best years of my 20s on someone who was never really committed to building a future together. Those are supposed to be some of the most fun, adventurous years of your life, and I spent them walking on eggshells around someone who made me feel like I was constantly competing with every other woman on the planet. I'm 28 now with 2 little kids, trying to figure out how to start completely over and rebuild my entire life from scratch. It's absolutely terrifying, but also kind of exciting to think about eventually being with someone who actually wants to be with me, who doesn't make me feel like I'm constantly falling short of some impossible standard. I know I have a lot of serious healing to do before I'm ready for another relationship. I need to figure out how to spot these kinds of red flags much earlier, and how to trust my instincts when something feels wrong instead of making excuses for behavior that makes me uncomfortable. I need to learn how to set firm boundaries and actually stick to them instead of constantly compromising my own needs to keep the peace. I need to rebuild my sense of self-worth so that I never again accept being treated like I'm lucky to have someone's attention. But I also know for certain now that what I experienced wasn't normal or healthy, despite him constantly trying to convince me that all men behave that way. Good partners don't make you feel insecure and inadequate on a daily basis. They don't constantly fantasize about other people and then make you feel crazy for being upset about it. I'm sharing all of this because I desperately need validation that I'm not overreacting or being too sensitive about any of this stuff. When you're in the middle of a situation like this, especially when the other person is constantly telling you that you're being unreasonable, it becomes really hard to trust your own feelings and perceptions. But writing it all out like this, and seeing it in black and white, I can clearly see how completely fucked up the whole situation was from beginning to end. No wonder I felt like I was losing my mind trying to make sense of his behavior and figure out what I needed to do differently to make him happy. He was essentially having emotional affairs, while making me feel guilty for having normal expectations about fidelity, respect, and consideration in marriage. He was using me as a security blanket while pursuing other women, and then acting like I was the problem when I wasn't okay with that arrangement. I'm still processing a lot of anger about the years I lost and the way he systematically destroyed my self-confidence and made me question my own worth. But I'm also genuinely grateful that I finally found the strength to leave before things got even worse or before our kids got old enough to really understand what was happening. My children are going to grow up seeing that their mom has standards and won't tolerate being treated poorly by anyone, including people who claim to love her. That's probably the most important thing to come out of this whole mess, teaching them what healthy relationships actually look like and what they should expect from future partners. I never want them to accept the kind of behavior I put up with for way too long. And I never want them to think it's normal for someone to make you feel like you're not good enough, just as you are. Anyway, thanks for reading this absolute novel if you actually made it this far. It feels really good to get all of this out of my head and see it written down somewhere. Sometimes you need that outside perspective to realize just how bad things really were when you were too close to the situation to see it clearly.